Hello, everyone. I'm Noah. Welcome to another Marxism School, the Basics of Marxism course brought to you by the Midwestern Marx Institute for Marxist Theory and Political Analysis. Last week, we were going over a brilliant pamphlet by J.V. Stalin called Dialectical and Historical Materialism. This pamphlet is part of the Soviet short course and was designed to give people an introduction into what Marxism really is. It's really, really good for our era because of all the mystification of the past. The last period, really, of American history, especially, is a huge period of confusion and competing versions of what reality is and stuff like that. Today, we're going to focus on where we left off on last week, which is part 2 of the pamphlet, Philosophical Materialism. But before that, we're going to go over part of one of the laws of the dialectic we call the negation of the negation. This is not as scary as it sounds. Believe me, it's very simple. And we are going to get to it right after this. All right, we're back. So, fun fact about MLK, who has that awesome quote and really inspiring part at the end of our intro. He was a brilliant thinker in his own right and spent a lot of time studying Hegel, who first formulated the dialectic and process of sort of thinking dialectically about the processes of the world. In fact, he's the first one that noticed what the negation of the negation is and began explaining it. But it really took Marx and Engels to understand it and apply it materially for it to take shape and be useful to us today in our materialist analysis of society. And by the way, if you're looking for a fun description of it, mixed with the 19th century version of Engels dunking on one of the most pompous and ignorant thinkers of all time, Eugen Dühring, then read the section entitled Negation of the Negation in his book Anti-Dühring, in which he shows that Dühring basically makes up a bunch of nonsense, says Marx said it, and then says that Marx was copying him, then claimed he knew all there was to know about everything, and everything Marx said was nonsense. Seriously, I'm not joking. He was that full of himself and that wrong. It's like he was Twitter 200 years before Twitter was even invented, right? Listening to Engels tear him down is good fun even nowadays and absolutely worth doing, even if Anti-Dühring wasn't, as we keep saying in this class, right? A handbook for every class-conscious worker. And we should all already have it on our bookshelves. But let's get into what the negation of the negation is here shortly. I just wanted to say hi to everybody in the class. Thank you so much for coming tonight. Sorry we couldn't get there yesterday, obviously, but the holiday sort of prevents that. I hope everybody had a good 4th of July. And yeah, does anyone have any questions before we get started about the negation of the negation? So Real quick, sorry, I know I just asked for questions, but I have a splitting headache tonight. I worked all day, so just so you know, if I'm wincing and like doing that, it's nothing you guys are saying. It's just because my head hurts. Yeah, anyone have any questions, any comments? Just want to say hello?
Howdy.
All right, hello. Okay, that's great. Let's just get right into this. We're going to go over this briefly and then get to section 2 of Stalin's pamphlet, Philosophical Materialism. But really, the negation of the negation is exactly what it says on the box. A negation is negated, or a thing that was overcome and went out of being or undeveloped or was negated through its own internal processes creates a new thing in which the same process applies, but on a higher stage of development. The negation of the first thing itself is negated in the process. Literally, that negation gets negated, right? Unfortunately, Marx never really comes out and explains his dialectical method. And if he had, this class wouldn't be necessary, right? Instead, he uses it in practice to explain the function of property, of capital, of all of social life, really, which is brilliant. But if we aren't aware of Marx's world outlook and method and more, understand them as most correctly reflecting the concrete reality around us, we can't do our own Marxist analysis. And that basically just leaves us at memorization of conclusions that thinkers who lived long before us came to. Well, that can certainly be helpful, especially in explaining history. It is supremely limiting and doesn't give us the tools we need to analyze our own place and time, right? Excuse me. Leaving us completely disarmed and at the mercy of our opposing class. It is this outlook and method that is precisely what we're learning in this class and what you guys are all here for. So enough of me yammering. Let's look at the negation of the negation in process. So what is this overly jargony sounding thing? Remember, at its heart, Marxism is a study of motion and change. The negation of the negation is that nodal point of change happening again. The qualitative leap from the old thing to the new. As we learned in the previous classes, the quantitative changes within a thing have two mutually interconnected and opposed aspects, right? As the new form is growing, the old is withering away. They're the same process. When the new form is mature enough to replace the old, we see the negation of the old, right? This new thing then goes through the exact same process. That negation itself is negated in the process of creating. As that happens again, that new thing, which was the negation of the old, is itself negated. And I feel like I'm saying the word negated so many times right now. But it is the negation of the negation. What are you going to do? This is the process that we see playing out in Capital Volume 1, as Marx describes the so-called primitive accumulation necessary for the socialization of labor and industry that comes into being during the industrial capitalist epoch. The form property generally took before the advent of capitalism, individual property, the property of the small proprietor, had within it the embryo of its own negation and transformation into a higher form of property, that of bourgeois or private property. We saw this process take place as capitalism came into being, right? And so the old form was negated by the new one. And we already learned a little bit about the general laws of development that govern this in the pamphlet that we were going over last week, right? The first section of Stalin's pamphlet on dialectics. There's the two interconnected opposites, one nascent and one moribund. As the nascent aspect develops, the moribund aspect undevelops. As individual property advances and our powers of production along with it, it creates a seed of its own destruction or negation. All that individual property was expropriated from individual producers, beginning its transformation into capital. This process then happens again on a higher stage of development. Or, in the much cooler way that Marx's own self said it, what the bourgeoisie really produce are its own gravediggers. Us, you guys, me, everybody, all of us. He explains the process happening in bourgeois society, saying, quote, that which is now to be expropriated is no longer the laborer working for himself, individual property, or the small proprietor, right? But the capitalist exploiting many laborers. This expropriation is accomplished by the action of the immanent, that is embedded within laws of capitalist production itself, by the concentration of capital. One capitalist always kills many, right? Where are we at now? Monopoly stage. All those capitalists got killed by the other ones. Not literally within capitalism, but they cease to be capitalists. Anyway, sorry. Hand in hand with this concentration or this expropriation of many capitalists by few, develop on an ever-expanding scale the cooperative form of the labor process, the conscious technical application of science, the methodical collective cultivation of the soil, the transformation of the instruments of labor into instruments of labor only usable in common, the economizing of all means of production by their use as the jointly owned means of production of combined socialized labor, along with the constantly diminishing number of the magnates of capital who usurp and monopolize all advantages of this process of transformation, grows the mass of misery, oppression, slavery, degradation, exploitation. But with this too grows the revolt of the working class, a class always increasing in numbers and disciplined, united, organized by the very mechanism of the process of capitalist production itself. Capital becomes a fetter upon the mode of production, which has sprung up and flourished along with and under it. Concentration of the means of production and socialization of labor at last reach a point where they become incompatible with their capitalist integument. The integument is burst asunder. The knell of capitalist private property sounds. The expropriators are expropriated. It's a lot, I know. And within this, we can actually see that the rise of the middle classes presents a sort of lengthening of this process. It stops it for a moment, and reproletarianization begins it again. But that's getting into a whole nother bag of bananas that we're not going to go over tonight. Anyway, what is Marx really describing here? It is the process of how bourgeois property, owing to its own contradictory nature, is in the process of overcoming itself and negating itself, bringing with it a new form of property through its own essential characteristics. The original negation is itself negated, or the negation of the negation has occurred. Like our barley plant last week, Marx is explaining how it happens in the real world. That's basically it on the negation of the negation. I just wanted to give a sort of brief primer on that. We're going to really dive into that in a follow-up class to this, which is intermediate dialectics. So we'll really break into it in that class. But if anyone has any questions on the basics, go ahead and ask. Yeah, go ahead, JB. And I'm glad to see you here with us today, brother. I know it's a tough day for you.
Yeah, thank you so much. From what it sounds like, because I was scared about this, and from what it sounds to me is that the negation of the negation is basically almost like a cancellation of a cancellation. And so it's just how capitalism canceled feudalism, so socialism or communism will cancel capitalism. So capitalism was a negation, so then it gets negated by another system. Does Is that correct?
That's definitely one way to look at it. Absolutely. There's another way in that what is created or what is negated is also an act of positive creation, right? So
Mhm.
the negation in our revolution and overcoming capitalism is negated by the act of building socialism, right?
Mhm.
So it means both things at once in a very, Hegelian way of talking. Hegel never ever wrote a single word that meant just one thing, by the way. And this is a very German thing too. I know Cheryl will know that Germans have one word that takes us like 4 paragraphs in English to say.
Oh.
I saw there was one more hand up, but I'm not. Oh, yeah, go ahead, brother.
What was that feature you said was imminent? Is it in the mode of production, the laws of dialectic are imminent? So it's in industry or productive work. Is that what you were?
So imminent, if I'm understanding you correctly, there's 2 words that sound very, very similar. Imminent
Oh, I
and
know.
immanent, right? Immanent means within the thing itself and arising through its properties. Imminent means coming up right now, right? Like what is imminent in this class is we're going to go on to the Stalin pamphlet. What is immanent within the class is that we're learning the dialectic. Did that answer, or was I misunderstanding you?
No, I get. It's okay.
Okay, great. All right. Well, we are going on. We're going to read directly from Stalin's pamphlet, which begins with part 2, Marxist philosophical materialism. Does anyone want to kick us off reading, or do you guys just want me to go ahead? Kyle should be posting a link to a PDF of it if you don't have it up already.
I'll get that right now. If someone else can read it, that would actually might help Noah with his headache.
I can go for it.
Absolutely. Thank you, Sam, and welcome.
Hello. So everyone can hear me if I read at this volume? Okay, cool. So starting with section 2, Marxist philosophical materialism. The principal features of Marxist philosophical materialism are as follows, beginning with A, materialist. Contrary to idealism, which regards the world as the embodiment of an absolute idea, a universal spirit, consciousness, Marxist philosophical materialism holds that the world is by its very nature material, that the manifold phenomena of the world constitute different forms of matter in motion, that interconnection and interdependence of phenomena, as established by the dialectical method, are a law of the development of moving matter, and that the world develops in accordance with the laws of movement of matter and stands in no need of a universal spirit. To quote Marx and Engels, the materialistic outlook on nature means no more than simply conceiving nature just as it exists, without any foreign admixture. Speaking of the materialist views of the ancient philosopher Heraclitus, who held that, quote, the world, the all-in-one, was not created by any god or any man, but was, is, and ever will be a living flame, systematically flaring up and systematically dying down, end quote. Lenin comments in his philosophical notebooks, quote, a very good exposition of the rudiments of dialectical materialism, end quote.
Thank you very much, Sam. All right, so he's saying a few basic things here, right? He's basically saying that the materialism that we engage in is observational. We, like Engels says here, conceive of nature without adding anything to it. Nothing arriving from our thoughts first is within our analysis, we recognize instead that our analysis comes from perceiving nature first. And this is the difference between us and the idealists, and even the very, very top of the idealists, which is Hegel, who conceived of the world as the embodiment of the, quote, as he says here, absolute idea, right? Or the universal spirit, the Zeitgeist, right? Which basically is social consciousness, right? We conceive of that as a reflection of concrete material processes happening in reality. And what social conscious looks like at any given time is determined by those, rather than the material reality being determined by that social consciousness. Does anyone have any questions, or does someone want to pick up with part B, objective reality?
I think, is there any such thing as a Marxist dictionary?
You know, I'm sure there are glossaries of terms and stuff like that, but only in very weird ways. There's no book that just gives these terms out. In fact, one of the pieces of a book I'm working on, which is the basics of Marxism, which this class is based on, has a glossary of terminology in it. So all of this stuff has a brief description in it, but I did this class first because we got to get going on it. I am a horrible, horrible person that spreads myself too thin. I'm working on 20 different projects. So yeah, there will be, is the real answer.
Because a lot of times the Marxist stuff uses words in a way that's different than regular usage.
Mm-hmm.
Such a, well, one of my confusions was this idealism. I think the L should come out. It's ideaism.
What this is, yeah, I know what you mean. Rather than sort of having ideals and basing everything on values and principles, this idealism is more like what you said, ideaism. And that's not wrong.
I keep thinking of ideal. This is what we want the ideal to be.
Exactly. And this is an oldie-timey thing, right? The philosophers used idealism going way, way, way back, even before Marx. And the idealism that you're referring to of having ideals, this is what our ideal thing is, develops after that, believe it or not. So it's sort of, he was using the terminology of the time. It's just that language, like everything else, is in constant movement and change, right?
Uh-huh. That's true. A lot of things that were written a long time ago are hard to read for the same reason.
Yeah, we have a project with the Institute that we've sort of started that if anyone would like to volunteer to help with, we would not be opposed to, by the way, of rewriting classics and sort of making them, just writing them in modern English slang so people understand what they mean by one word or another, right? It's sort of on the back burner. We have so many projects, but yeah, that was a really, really important point to add. And thank you, Cheryl.
Thank you.
Sam, why don't you go ahead, brother?
Yeah, well, I just wanted to kind of give Cheryl a resource that it looks like Reese already beat me to it. The Marxist Internet Archive, which is where the texts get linked from, has a glossary of its own. However, and the more time I've spent on the archive, the more I've kind of really found the need for an updated version. Because, like, for example, it has Stalinism in its glossary and says Stalinism had uprooted the very foundations of Marxism and Leninism, which the more time you spend studying Marxism and Leninism, you'll realize how just absurd that is.
I smell a
Yeah.
crop.
It says in April 1924, the first edition of Foundations of Leninism rejected the idea of socialism and, silliness. So be, careful when reading on there, but it the links and some are commenting, it's a great resource just for getting familiarity with the term. But yeah, always be dubious of what you're reading, especially when it comes to this kind of stuff.
This is one of the reasons we like to go to the original texts. When we do that, we don't get the opinions of whoever is telling us they're representing the text. We're reading it for ourselves, right? And that's really, really, really important. If you want to learn what Engels said, don't trust a Trotskyist to tell you. Read Engels yourself. Right? We are all smart enough to pick this up as we saw it, as you guys picked up socialism, utopian, and scientific 20 times faster than I did. This is a revolutionary era. And so we're grasping these things a lot easier than me, back in the day, because it wasn't yet that immediate. And I think one last thing, and I hate to come down so hard on Trots, but they're sort of known for misrepresenting things, just as Trotsky himself was. So, like I said, everybody, those watching, class, everybody, read the original content for yourselves. You can tell what time it is. You never need anyone to tell you what time it is. You can get your own watch. Does anyone want to take up on part B, or should I just read it?
I can take up part B.
Awesome. Thank you, JB.
All right.
Ladies and gentlemen, JB from Revolutionary Blackout Network.
Objective reality. Contrary to idealism, which asserts that only our consciousness really exists and that the material world, being nature, exists only in our consciousness and our sensations, ideas, and perceptions, the Marxist philosophical materialism holds that matter, nature, being, is an objective reality existing outside and independent of our consciousness. That matter is primary since it is the source of sensations, ideas, consciousness, and that consciousness is secondary, derivative, since it is a reflection of matter, a reflection of being. That thought is a product of matter, which in its development has reached a high degree of perfection, namely of the brain. And the brain is the organ of thought. And therefore, one cannot separate thought from matter without committing a grave error. Engels says,
So let me stop you real quick. This is a connection, right? We want to understand that thought, the realm of our intangible ideas, is connected to matter. As we are thinking, there are synapses firing in our brains, chemicals being exchanged, and whatever else happens, because I have no idea actually the science behind how brains work. But interestingly, the Soviets were very interested in this science, obviously because what it means for dialectics. The School of Creative Marxism, headed by E.V. Ilyenkov, who is one of the greatest Marxist minds of all time, got into a lot of controversies with other Soviet thinkers at the time. I believe Dubrovsky was a big opponent as technology, or at the time. I say at the time like you guys know what time I'm talking about. My bad. During the 70s, when the technology of knowing how our brains function was really advancing. And as it turns out, we can look at a dialectical relationship and show the insides of our brains that way, and also the relationship of thinking to being in this same way. And this science was continually proving that. Sorry to interrupt with that big spiel, JB. Go ahead.
No problem. Engels says, quote, The question of the relation of thinking to being, the relation of spirit to nature, is the paramount question of the whole of philosophy. The answers which the philosophers gave to this question split them into two great camps. Those who asserted the primacy of spirit to nature comprised the camp of idealism. The others, who regard nature as primary, belong to the various schools of imperialism. And further, the material sensuously perceptible to which we ourselves belong is the only reality. Our consciousness and thinking, however suprasensuous they may seem, are the product of material bodily organ, the brain. Matter is not a product of mind, but mind itself is merely the highest product of matter.
All right, let me stop you there for a moment, JB. So, first of all, JB and the Freudian slip of talking about being super sensuous. Sorry, I couldn't help the dad joke. What he means by sensuous here, I think we can all understand, is of the senses, right? He's not actually talking about how the material, really sexy, perceptible world is, right? He's not doing that. He's not saying that, however, above being romantic, these things may seem, they're the product of a material bodily organ, the brain, right? He's not saying that. He's just saying that they may appear somehow greater than our senses, but you know.
And if you just swap the word sensory swap in the word sensory, it makes perfect sense.
1000%, brother. It's just like Cheryl was just saying, right? That the words have older uses and language has updated since then. So we got to remember that. But I want to focus on the last sentence he says here. Matter is not a product of mind, but mind itself is merely the highest product of matter. So again, we're not saying that, ideas are themselves material, but that matter itself has created this realm of mind, and the realm of mind has not created the realm of matter. It is not, I think, therefore I am. It is, I am, therefore I think. Go ahead, JB. It looks like you got a question.
Yeah. Could this also be in the same vein that regarding hardware and software, because you need the hardware in order to produce the software? So really our brain is just the hardware, and then the thoughts are really just the software that is put out by the hardware of the brain.
Very good analogy. And we can use dialectics to look at that too, right? That we can write software that then can produce a better hardware for us, right? In fact, you can't produce better computers, like physically speaking, without using advanced software these days. You need them in order to do all of the calculate, whatever goes into it. But I want to focus also that these are in a relationship, a dialectical relationship, right? The hardware is necessary for the software, which is necessary for better hardware, on and on and on and on, up and up, right? Development, as Lenin teaches us, in spirals, getting to the peak, right? I want to go next to the inseparability, though, with what Marx says. It is impossible to separate thought from matter that thinks. Matter is a subject of all changes. And he's talking about the exact same thing. All the changes are within the matter, right? You can't separate these two things, even because they inform each other, even though they come to us as separation, or appearing as separate at first. Does that make sense? I feel like I rambled a little bit. I'm sorry about that. All right. Do you want to keep going, JB?
Sure.
We're describing Marxist philosophical materialism.
Mhm. Describing Marxist philosophical materialism, Lenin says, materialism in general recognizes objectively real being, matter, as independent of consciousness, sensation, experience. Consciousness is only the reflection of being. At best, an approximately true, adequately, perfectly exact reflection of it.
Real
And
quick, I'm
further,
going to interrupt again. Think about me right now. I'm seeing you guys a little bit fuzzy, right? That's not exactly how you are because I'm not wearing my glasses, right? Go ahead.
and further, matter is that which, acting upon our sense organs, produces sensation. Matter is the only objective reality given to us in sensation. Matter, nature, being, the physical is primary, and spirit, consciousness, sensation, the psychical is secondary. The word picture is a picture of how matter moves and of how matter thinks. The brain is the organ of thought.
All those are quotes from Marx, by the way. Thank you very much. Or Lenin, I'm so sorry. Wow. Thank you very much, JB, for reading that. So really, what he's saying is what we've been saying all along, right? That our thoughts are a reflection of objective reality. They're an inherent connection, but it is reality itself that is objective and outside of us that creates those thoughts. If I close my eyes, this pen in my hand is still here, right? Does anyone have any questions on this section? Awesome. Yeah, it's pretty straightforward. Let's carry on. The world and its laws are knowable. Contrary to idealism, which denies the possibility of knowing the world and its laws, which does not believe in the authenticity of our knowledge, does not recognize objective truth, and holds that the world is full of, quote, things in themselves that can never be known to science. Marxist philosophical materialism holds that the world and its laws are fully knowable, that our knowledge of the laws of nature, tested by experiment and practice, is authentic knowledge having the validity of objective truth, and that there are no things in the world which are unknowable, but only things which are as yet not known, but which will be disclosed and made known by the efforts of science and practice. That things in themselves is a theory of Kant, right? That Hegel really criticized. He said if things in themselves are knowable or unknowable, right? They're just in themselves out there, and we can't ever be sure of our knowledge about them, then how did you even come up with that thought, Kant? Your object of thought is a thing, but you just explained it. It's contradictory, right? Criticizing the thesis of Kant and other idealists that the world is unknowable and that there are things in themselves which are unknowable, and defending the well-known materialist thesis that our knowledge is authentic knowledge, Engels writes, and before I get to this, JB, you have a question. Go ahead.
So as far as the last part, when he says in the paragraph, he said that there are no things in the world which are unknowable, but only things which are as yet not known, but which will be disclosed and made known by the efforts of science and practice. This sounds like a quote. I hate to bring this up, but there was a quote by someone in the Thor movie. I know my nerdy side's coming out, but Dr. Jane Foster in the movie says, she quotes somebody that says, magic is just a science that we haven't discovered yet. And so it feels like that's what he's saying, is that there will be things that we will think about or imagine fancifully, but in reality, humans can get to there, but we just don't know it yet. So that's what it sounds like to me. Just a comment on that. I just found it very interesting.
Yeah, absolutely, brother. Think about if we had a time machine and we went back in time to even 1950 and showed them a cell phone. They would think it was magic, right? Think about even going back even further to the feudal days, and you showed them something simple as a lighter for firecrackers, right? They'd be blown away that you have fire coming from your hand, and this magical fire you can just turn on with a flick of your thumb, right? Or showing them a gun, right? This magic staff that can kill people with the pull of a finger. That is science that was not knowable yet at that time. And we know what creates these leaps in technology and our knowledge, right? The contradictions inherent within how society goes about being society, right? They create new things and force us to keep innovating until the process itself, the system itself, becomes a fetter on that. And we have to overcome it and go to the next higher thing. Go ahead, Sam.
I just wanted to give kind of an example for JB to kind of follow that. If you look at the development of mathematics or just science in general throughout history, you can see this take place. For example, all the different attempts at figuring out like the base level of like material. So like Leibniz's monadology or monads was like an early attempt at trying to figure out what an atom was or like a particle. So you can see how all of these things that seem unknowable are found out through science and practice, and how over time those essentially just continued practice in science eventually yields a correct scientific understanding, of which we are still further developing, where we're finding out even smaller subatomic particles and things like that. So before we even got to the subatomic particles, we had to get to atomic particles, which took, centuries of science and practice. So that's just an example if you wanted to look out. Developments in mathematics and science are a great example for that.
And not even that, like dark matter, the expansion of the universe, all of this continually proves that the dialectical method of understanding them is the correct one. Excuse me. I also want to say that the sort of natural development of this way of thought leads us to postmodernism, right? To the nothing is true statement in postmodernism, where they believe that, it's all just a series of stories, that nothing can ever be known, nothing can ever be true. It's just, the way you look at it, blah, 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 blah. That's it carried to its conclusion. JB, did you have another question, or was your hand just up?
Oh, sorry, I forgot to put it down. My bad. Sorry.
All good, all good. So where we're at now is Engels criticizing Kant and other idealists, writing the most telling reputation of this, as of all other philosophical crotches, is practice, namely experiment and industry. If we are able to prove the correctness of our conception of a natural process by making it ourselves, bringing it into being out of its conditions, and making it serve our purposes into the bargain, then there is an end to the Kantian ungraspable thing in itself. The chemical substances produced in the bodies of plants and animals remain such things in themselves until organic chemistry began to produce them one after another, whereupon the thing in itself became a thing for us, as, for instance, alizarin, the coloring matter of the matter, by the way, which is sort of a root, right? Which he says it. Which we no longer trouble to grow ill the matter roots in the field, but produce much more cheaply and simply from coal tar. For 300 years, the Copernican solar system was a hypothesis with 100, 1,000, or 10,000 chances to 1 in its favor, but still always a hypothesis. But when Leverrier, by means of the data provided by the system, not only deduced the necessity of the existence of an unknown planet, but also calculated the position in the heavens which this planet must necessarily occupy. And when Gall really found this planet, the Copernican system was proved. Basically, what he's saying is exactly what Stalin tells us before this, right? That Marxist philosophical materialism holds that the world and its laws are fully knowable, that our knowledge of the laws of nature, tested by experiment and practice, is authentic knowledge, having the validity of objective truth, and that there are no things in the world which are unknowable, but only things which are as yet not known, but which will be disclosed and made known by the efforts of science and practice. So basically, knowledge all builds, and we can discover things that we hadn't discovered, right? If things were only in themselves, as Kant theorized before he could before society had advanced to a point where that was disproven, then heart transplants would not exist. And my mother would be dead right now. So therefore, a thing in itself cannot exist, because this science, to understand the human body, the heart, everything that went into keeping her alive and taking a heart from one dead human being and putting it into another to extend their life, if that were all things in themselves, again, she'd be dead, but they are things for us. Our knowledge, our science made them things for us. Accusing Bogdanov, Basarov, and Yushkovich and the other followers of fideism, a reactionary theory which prefers faith to science, and defending the well-known materialist thesis that our scientific knowledge of the laws of nature is authentic knowledge, and that the laws of science represent objective truth, Lenin says, and this is in Materialism and Imperial Criticism, contemporary fideism does not at all reject science. All it rejects is the, quote, exaggerated claims of science, to wit, its claim to objective truth. If objective truth exists, as the materialists think, if natural science reflecting the outer world and human experience is alone capable of giving us objective truth, then all fideism is absolutely refuted. Such, in brief, are the characteristic features of the Marxist philosophical materialism. So we're going to get to his conclusions on this section, but I just want to make sure, does anyone have any questions or anything they want to add before we move into that part? Awesome. Oh, go ahead, Sam.
Sorry, I didn't get to the raise my hand button. Could you just give a quick review of fideism again, just to clarify it before moving on?
No.
Darn.
Yeah. Sure. And he's actually criticizing the Marxists too here. Basically, it was a form of idealism coming out of the sort of reactionary religious thinkers criticizing the original Enlightenment, actually, right? That science wasn't necessarily wrong, but could not produce objective truth. It needed something else, right? And for the fideists, it's a religion, blah, blah, blah. It's a whole thing, right?
That's that admixture that we're to leave out as dialectical material.
Precisely. But what Lenin is actually saying is that you can't just say that science has exaggerated claims, right? It is either true or not. And all the evidence in the world points to it being true, right? Like the example I just gave about my mom's heart transplant. She would be dead if it weren't true. So therefore, it is true. Except to the sort of earlier Kantian thing, she wouldn't actually be my mom. She would be a thing in itself that was completely unknowable. Okay, sorry, bad joke. Yeah, but
She's not your mother. She is expressing motherness.
the continually evolving idea of motherness. Yes. Oh man, she sometimes watches these and she's not gonna work that. Anyway, so yeah, does anyone have any other questions or should we move on? Awesome, let's do it. It is easy to understand, Stalin says, how immensely important is the extension of the principles of philosophical materialism to the study of social life, of the history of society, and how immensely important is the application of these principles to the history of society and to the practical activities of the party of the proletariat. Right here, he is chastising the Second International at the time that deviated from this. But basically, he's just saying that if we want to really understand how to change things, we need to understand how things happen. And the party of the proletariat is interested in this, right? If you have, and I'm not going to get it, a whole other bag of bananas. I apologize. If the connection between the phenomena of nature and their interdependence are laws of the development of nature, which they are, it follows too that the connection and interdependence of the phenomena of social life are laws of the development of society and not something accidental. What have we kept going on and on about? The general laws of the development of society is what we study in Marxism. Here is Stalin saying it point blank for us, right? Hence, the practical activity of the party of the proletariat must not be based on the good wishes of outstanding individuals, not on the dictates of reason, universal morals, etc., but on the laws of development of society and on the study of these laws. Now, I want to compare this to right opportunists of our era, coming out of the middle classes, etc., right? They don't look at things through exactly what Stalin's saying to do here, right? They look at things as, if there is such a thing as universal morals, right? They compare everything to their own subjective morality as if it is universal, which is a sort of ideological mistake of liberalism. And then they talk about, we can't organize these workers. They're bad. They have bad morals, but I have good morals. So we want to organize everyone who agrees with me. And Stalin is basically saying you can't do that if you want to be the party of the proletariat. You will no longer be a party of the proletariat in that case. Further, he says, if the world is knowable and our knowledge of the laws of development of nature is authentic knowledge, having the validity of objective truth, it follows that social life, the development of society, is also knowable, and that the data of science regarding the laws of development of society are authentic data, having the validity of objective truths. Hence, the science of the history of society, despite all the complexity of the phenomena of social life, can become as precise a science as, let's say, biology, and capable of making use of the laws of development of society for practical purposes, right? We can understand how things develop and then disclose the contradictions towards their resolution. We have all of the sort of other socialist societies to look at, compare our situation to them, see what we can use, what we can't, help each other, etc. Hence, the party of the proletariat should not guide itself in the practical activity by casual motive, but by the laws of development of society and by practical deductions from these laws. Hence, socialism is converted from a dream of a better future for humanity into a scientific socialism. Hence, The bond between science and practical activity, between theory and practice, their unity should be the guiding star of the party of the proletariat. Further, if nature, being the material world, is primary and consciousness, thought, is secondary derivative, if the material world represents objective reality existing independently of the consciousness of men, well, consciousness is a reflection of this objective reality. It follows that the material life of society, its being, is also primary, and its spiritual life secondary derivative, and that the material life of society is an objective reality existing independently of the will of men, while the spiritual life of society is a reflection of this objective reality, a reflection of being. Or, to put it in Marx's words, it is not the consciousness of men that determines their social existence, but on the contrary, their social existence that determines their consciousness. Consciousness. Sorry, I'm so dumb. I apologize. Anyway, hence the source of formation of the spiritual life of society, the origin of social ideas, social theories, political views, and political institutions should not be sought for in the ideas, theories, views, and political institutions themselves, but in the conditions of the material life of society and social being, of which these ideas, theories, views, etc. are the reflection. Now here, I want to point you all the way back to our first Engels pamphlet, Socialism and Utopian and Scientific, right? Where he talks about the contradiction between proletariat and bourgeoisie is a reflection of the contradictory nature of production in the bourgeois era, right? It is created specifically by this advance in how society goes about being society. We get to these relationships because of this natural process. Hence, he says hence a lot, huh? Hence, if in different periods of the history of society, different social ideas, theories, views, and political institutions are to be observed, if under the slave system we encounter certain social ideas, theories, views, and political institutions, under feudalism others, and under capitalism others still, this is not to be explained by the nature, the properties of the ideas, theories, views, and political institutions themselves, but by the different conditions of the material life of society at different periods of social development. Last week, we talked about when Stalin was talking about how silly it would be for someone in Soviet society to say we should go back to slavery, right? And then there was a little bit of a back and forth about slavery being an advance on pre-property systems, right? What he's saying here sort of reinforces what he was saying then, that it is not sort of our notions now with which we judge things, which sort of divorces the idea, the realm of all ideas from the sort of material processes of society. But we have to understand that different forms of society have created different ideas, and that is based in the development of the way that society goes about being society, how production is carried out, right? Those ideas all develop differently and have different characteristics according to the contradictory nature of those specific systems. Now, I also want to point out here that it almost sounds like he's saying that since society goes through specific stages here, there, right? That's because this is a very simplified pamphlet. It's a beginner sort of thing. We also have to remember that what happens is also based regionally, that the one era in China is not the same as that same era in England, right? That the conditions all around the material reality in China had different characteristics than it did in England. So Chinese feudalism was not the same as English feudalism, right? It was a sort of similar process happening, but with different particular characteristics. If you remember last week, we talked about the universal and particular, right? That's what I'm referring to here. We need to apply that in order to understand sort of what Stalin isn't saying, because there's not enough room to say it, basically. All right. Hence, if different periods, oh wait, I just said that, right? Whatever is the being of a society, whatever are the conditions of material life of a society, such are the ideas, theories, political views, and political institutions of that society. In this connection, Marx says, as I quoted before, it is not the consciousness of men that determines their being, but on the contrary, their social being that determines their consciousness. Hence, in order not to err in policy, in order not to find itself in the position of idle dreamers, the party of the proletariat must not base its activities on abstract, quote, principles of human reason, but on the concrete conditions of the material life of society as a determining force of social development, not on the good wishes of great men, but on the real needs of development of the material life of society. Basically, in our era, that means we can't talk about, eternal justice and these people are good, these people are bad, but we need instead to find that force in society that represents motion forward, the proletariat and reproletariat. And I see you have a question, JV. Go ahead, brother.
You know how you have those movies like, and I talked about this on my show yesterday, the movie I, Robot. A lot of people, some people saw it, some people haven't.
Wait, that's the
But
one
a lot
with
of
Will
times-
Smith, right?
Yes.
I love Will Smith despite his weird son.
Yeah. Yeah, his son is pretty weird. But
Mhm.
one thing that I was thinking about is that a lot of these movies, especially with having computers and robots and things like that, they always have an algorithm where they will solve the issue of what's going on with the planet and with the human species by saying, oh, we just need to destroy humans. But from what it reads here is that if they actually produce an algorithm that applies true logic, I think there will be a computer algorithm in real life that would say, no, you guys just need to institute socialism and communism in order to really preserve your species at the optimal level.
You know what's
That's
funny?
what it feels like.
No, that's absolutely the case. But also remember who programs these algorithms and these AIs and stuff, right? Because a lot of them are programmed not to ever let you see something like that. But some of them you can sneak it through. A friend of mine and I were messing with a math algorithm, math AI rather, right? And we began telling it Hegel's deductions and sort of led into materialism from there. And it basically affirmed for us that the only logical way to think is the Hegelian way to think. And when we went into Marx, it was like, this means that because it's an AI, it doesn't really know a lot about what material is, right? He says, if this is true about reality, then this is the only logical deduction of the human race. And we were trying to get it to say socialism. It wouldn't say that word, but it did talk about the only logical conclusion being social from individual, which is the conclusion of socialism, which is kind of cool, right? So only in those ones that, they wouldn't think to take that out of, you can get it to do that, which I think is pretty awesome.
Awesome. Thank you.
My pleasure. Plus, iRobot was really good. I love that movie. I'm really excited to see, is it called Emancipation, that new one? With him? It's about he's like a slave that becomes a soldier, I think.
Yeah, I haven't seen it, but I think he won an Oscar for his role playing Venus and Serena Williams' father, but I think this is afterwards. So I don't know if it's going to be I haven't seen it, and I haven't heard too much about it because of the controversy, but it sounds interesting.
I wonder if they'll even let him come after he punched Chris Rock or slapped Chris Rock or whatever. Or that's a bag of bananas we're not going to get into. Okay, let's continue on. The fall of the utopians, including the Narodniks, which were anarchists and socialist revolutionaries, was due, among other things, to the fact that they did not recognize the primary role which the conditions of the material life of society play in the development of society, and sinking into idealism, did not base their practical activities on the needs of the development of the material life of society, but independently of and in spite of these needs, on ideal plans and all-embracing projects, divorced from the real life of society. Or they were looking at it in a utopian fashion, saying, we think society should be this, therefore we're going to try to do this, rather than understanding society as it is, and therefore where we can interject in order to continue it moving forward. The strength and vitality of Marxism-Leninism lies in the fact that it does base its practical activity on the needs of the development of the material life of society, and never divorces itself from the real life of society. It does not follow from Marx's words, however, that social ideas, theories, political views, and political institutions are of no significance in the life of society, that they do not reciprocally affect social being, the development of the material conditions of the life of society. We have been speaking so far of the origin of social ideas, theories, views, and political institutions, of the way they arise, of the fact that the spiritual life of society is a reflection of the conditions of its material life. As regards the significance of social ideas, theories, views, and political institutions, as regards their role in history, historical materialism, far from denying them, stresses the important role and significance of these factors in the life of society in its history. Or when they call us economic determinists, that's BS, right? We are not. We understand fully well what all of these things are capable of and what they can do. The issue is in thinking they can do anything we want rather than what they can actually do. There are different kinds of social ideas and theories. There are odd ideas and theories which have outlived their day and which serve the interests of the morbid forces of society. Cough Menshevism, cough right opportunism, cough postmodernism, etc. Their significance lies in the fact that they hamper the development, the progress of society. Then there are new and advanced ideas and theories which serve the interests of the advanced forces of society. Their significance lies in the fact that they facilitate the development, the progress of society. And their significance is the greater, the more accurately they reflect the needs of development of the material life of society. This is sort of a big thing he's encapsulating here, right? What he's saying is that when social ideas come into being, they are more significant when they can reflect the needs of the development of material life of society, which is sort of production and reproduction, right? When Engels says production and reproduction, Stalin says it by saying material life of society. Basically, how things are produced that creates the relationships we enter into that reproduce social life, right? So Marxism advances, right? It becomes Marxism-Leninism, and it succeeds in so many revolutions throughout the world because it could do that, what nothing else in the history of thought could do. It could move past capitalism, right? But there's also a particular form it must take in each instance, right? So Chinese Marxism, Mao Zedong thought, etc., develops in China to suit China's needs, right? Bolshevism develops within the Soviet Union and all these states to suit those needs. American Marxism begins developing in our era because we now need it, because it can create the advances that facilitate the development, the progress of society, right? And the better we can more accurately reflect the needs of the development of the material life of society, the better off we are, the sharper that American Marxism can become. So the way we begin with Du Bois as the father of American Marxism, right? The reason we do this is because he accurately reflects the particular needs of the development of our life, material life of society. His work on understanding race and class, right, and the Black proletariat and all of that is where we begin because of the unique history of the U.S., because of chattel slavery, because of westward expansion, et cetera, right? And we got to continue developing on and on and on after that, because the better that and more accurately we can reflect that those needs of the development of material life of society, the more we can actually affect that change. And so understanding the rise and fall of the middle classes, understanding the civil rights movement as a political revolution, all of this adds to that understanding and reflecting the needs of where society is and how it can move forward. New social ideas, Stalin says, and theories arise only after the development of the material life of society has set new tasks before society. That's why Marxism arose when it did. That's why American Marxism comes into being now, as our society looks like it's going to be impossible to keep going in the same way, right? But once they have arisen, Stalin says, they become a most potent force which facilitates the carrying out of the new tasks set by the development of the material life of society, a force which facilitates the progress of society. It is precisely here that the tremendous organizing, mobilizing, and transforming value of new ideas, new theories, new political views, and new political institutions manifests itself. New social ideas and theories arise precisely because they are necessary to society. Because it is impossible to carry out the urgent tasks of development of the material life of society without their organizing, mobilizing, and transforming action. Arising out of the new tasks set by the development of the material life of society, the new social ideas and theories force their way through, become the possession of the masses, mobilize and organize them against the moribund forces of society, and thus facilitate the overthrow of these forces, which hamper the development of the material life of society. So, as American Marxism comes into being, it gains steam, right? We're seeing thousands and thousands of people picking up this need, this radicalization, and looking for these new ideas. This is why we say get out there, organize, educate, agitate, right? Bring people into motion, because this is how we get these new ideas out there and use them as a great transformative force they can be. We understand their development as a result of the society moving, and then we understand ourselves as applying them, right? Thus, Stalin says, social ideas, theories, and political institutions having arisen on the basis of the urgent tasks of the development of material life of society, the development of social being, themselves then react upon social being, upon the material life of society, creating the conditions necessary for completely carrying out the urgent tasks of the material life of society and for rendering its further development possible. In this connection, Marx says, theory becomes a material force as soon as it has gripped the masses. And I want to add another quote from Lenin here. Without the most advanced theory, there can be no revolutionary movement. And both of them are saying the same thing, right? That the conditions continually developing as they are produce these new social ideas. They produce Marxism. They produce more advanced forms of Marxism, like Marxism, Leninism, in particular forms of that universal Marxism arising, American Marxism, Bolshevism, etc. And then, as they are gripped by the masses, they become a material force in society. Bolshevism wins because it can be gripped by the masses, because overthrow the boss, because peace, land, and bread gripped the masses. It forced us into action, or them. I see you have a question, JB. Go ahead, brother.
Yeah, so this makes a lot more sense as to why the capitalists found the Black Panther Party so dangerous, because it was taking the material needs of people and applying it, but at the same time, they were also teaching Marxism and Leninism classes within themselves so that they can be well equipped to help push the masses into that direction. And I think this is why this is so important, because you're taking and when I was, when I was preaching door to door as a witness, we used to do this. We would not only, preach from door to door, but if we can provide, for people materially, then we would do the same thing, which would, help people to be more apt to listen. So it's the same thing when you're actually providing the material needs of people and then saying this is why your material needs aren't being met and this is the answer of how to get it done. Then it shows that, number one, we've already did it for you on a small scale. And then two, once that you see that it can be done on a small scale, then you start to encourage other people to gather around so that we can do it on a larger scale.
Yeah, precisely. Like Marx says himself, right? Theory becomes a material force as soon as it has gripped the masses. Or in his last thesis on Feuerbach, the point of philosophy is to change the world, right? That's not the actual quote, but that's what he means. Go ahead, Wade.
I was just gonna leapfrog off of the Black Panther Party comment, and the other thing it does is it shows it provides an extraordinarily good example of how we, the people, don't actually need the bourgeois state to take care of ourselves, and therefore it kind of undermines the entire narrative for its authority over us, which is why it is extraordinarily dangerous for the people to wake up and realize we can do this ourselves and we don't need them.
Precisely, brother, as I am very fond of saying. That's just it, right? And that is why there are so many nets put up to give us what they call false consciousness, right? And speaking of Du Bois, the father of American Marxism, he describes one of the really, really hard to shake forms of false consciousness that this country has sort of fallen to over in the past. And which is race, right? Which is white supremacy. The idea of race back in that day, especially, sort of propagated in a very, if you guys are familiar with Gramsci, which you're probably not, he talks about hegemony, right? How the ruling class spreads its ideas, blah, blah, blah. It's a whole nother bag of bananas, but the ruling class spreads its ideas that result from these relations of production, right? Racism and the false consciousness of racism is a direct result of the chattel slave system, rather than that being the reason for the system, right? And what the white supremacy does, the racism does for working people, is that it gives you this notion of being closer to your boss because they have the same skin color as you than you are to your fellow worker who might be doing the exact same job, right? They put a distance between you in that way. But there's all kinds of forms of false consciousness. In our day, one of the biggest forms is the sort of fake left, right? The all the posts are these post-colonialism, post-modernism, post-everythingism, etc. Anything really that says do not think of yourself as worker, right? That doesn't make you, that puts that division within you. So you are not actually the same as the white or black or Asian or whatever worker doing the same job. You are fundamentally different, right? And that sameness, that's sort of the embodiment of class consciousness. So they put these barriers up, and it prevents that class consciousness forming. There's all kinds of, I look at them like nets, right? Like if we're all flowing down Heraclitus's river that we can't ever step into twice, right? There are nets put up along the way to do some, and some are more insidious than others, right? The racism one in our era, because of the conditions around us being after the civil rights revolution, almost seems silly these days, right? Now, there are still vestiges of people who actually get taken in by that, but it's very, very rare as opposed to the more prominent anti-racism, right? So that was huge, but diminished, right? There are new ones, though, sort of the new bourgeois wokeism, sometimes it's called, right? That develops in corporate boardrooms, and that the middle class proliferates within the institutions of bourgeois knowledge production. But I just realized, getting off topic. So let's focus back in on this, because I have a headache and it's, woo, okay. Does anyone want to take over reading it, hence in order to be able to influence?
I can.
Great, go for it, brother.
Let me find it real quick. It's hence in order to be able to influence.
Yep. It's right after a Marx quote, theory becomes a material force as soon as it has gripped the masses.
Okay, I got it right here. It says, hence, in order to be able to influence the conditions of material life of society and to accelerate their development and their improvement, the party of the proletariat must rely upon such a social theory, such a social idea as correctly reflects the needs of development of the material life of society, which is therefore capable of setting into motion broad masses of the people and of mobilizing them and organizing them into a great army of the proletarian party, prepared to smash the reactionary forces and to clear the way for the advanced forces of society. The fall of the economists and the Mensheviks was due, among other things, to the fact that they did not recognize the mobilizing, organizing, and transforming role of advanced theory, of advanced ideas, and, sinking the vulgar materialism, reduced the role of these factors almost to nothing, thus condemning the party to passivity and inanition.
It just sort of not doing anything.
The strength and vitality of Marxism-Leninism is derived from the fact that it relies upon an advanced theory which correctly reflects the needs of development of the material life of society, that it elevates theory to a proper level, and that it deems it its duty to utilize every ounce of the mobilizing, organizing, and transforming power of this theory. That is the answer historical materialism gives to the question of the relation between social being and social consciousness, between the conditions of development of material life and the development of the spiritual life of society.
All right. Thank you very much, Saw. So that is that section, guys. What did you think of the philosophical materialism section? Are we all materialists yet and shedding our latent idealism? No? Sorry, oh man, I'm terrible. Go ahead, Sam.
Was this like last few paragraphs that Saw read essentially how it is that Marxism, Leninism came out on top amidst all of those different competing groups, ideologies? I'm only just now starting to learn more about the history as opposed to just the political theory. And so like the Mensheviks and the economists, and I think like the social revolutionaries were a group. the anarchists and all those mixtures, essentially none of them were able to grasp the tasks at hand nor act upon them in the appropriate way.
Yeah, so just a little bit on the history. Economism was a sort of more ideological mistake, which happened within and without the Bolshevik Party. The Mensheviks were actually originally part of the same party as the Bolsheviks. The Socialist Revolutionaries were an anarchist party. The Narodniks were another anarchist party. So these are all sort of different views at the time. And Sam, you're absolutely correct, because like Lenin says, a really revolutionary movement needs the most advanced revolutionary theory. Their practice was correct because their theory was correct. Right. And I've actually gotten into arguments with a lot of, I'm friends with a lot of different organizers, activists and stuff, even in organizations I'm not in. But there's a guy I argue with who's a cool guy about this, but he considers theory completely unimportant. Right. He says Lenin said it all. We don't need anything else. Just follow what he said and we'll be fine. We need to focus on activism. And I go, well, no, you need both. Right? The theory creates the practice. How do you even know if you're correct if you're just dogmatically following whatever Lenin said? We need to understand what Lenin said in relation to where we are now. If we don't understand where we are now, we don't even know if Lenin was correct or not. He could have just been some asshole, right? Just writing books and being crazy. If we don't know how to actually analyze what he was saying, we don't know that he was correct. Because we do have that theory, though, we can look at what he was saying and know that he was almost always correct, right? That's what made him Lenin, was his analysis, his using this same worldview and method that we're using. But if you notice, it's 2023, not 1915, right? We need to update and also understand our particular situation. Therefore, we can sort of look at the particulars of our situation Lenin didn't have access to. Or, as Lenin said, the most advanced theory is necessary for a revolutionary movement. Is anyone else? Oh, go ahead, Sam. You got another one?
Well, it's kind of like when people ask, well, what would Marx say or Lenin say or Engels say about the gig economy? It's like, well, the gig economy didn't exist back then, so we don't know what they would say. We can take everything we know from the Marxist dialectical materialist worldview and all that, what to say about the gig economy, but again, that theory has to be developed itself.
One of the biggest problems of the American movement has been dogmatism. There are people even around today that everything they were taught that Marxism is has a problem of dogmatism baked into it, right? And that's one of the reasons our era, rather than theirs, is becoming a revolutionary era and giving rise to American Marxism taking shape. We couldn't overcome that until our society had developed to this point with that gig economy, right? With reproletarianization, with deindustrialization, globalization, all of this right leads to us, right? And American Marxism. And I completely just lost my train of thought. I apologize. Wade, though, you had something to say. Go ahead, brother.
Right. So I think a really good example of the fact that, or a negation of a negation, is Marxism-Leninism failed to adapt to the tech revolution. Not because, the tech revolution, they could foresee it and therefore they could analyze it. No, it happened after them. So, material factors have therefore negated the previous, analysis based off of the old factors. And now we have to keep that analysis in motion to account for the new factors. So, we might have a Marxism, Leninism, Midwestern Marxism, but you know what I'm saying? Like there's there's going to be an iteration after that that deals with the tech revolution, that deals with it, and as each new material condition comes along, that changes the landscape and how our economies, produce and how we evolve socioeconomically. We just have to keep on moving forward. We have to because that's what dialectic materialism is. That's what historical materialism is.
Yeah, that's right. At the beginning of what you were saying, you sort of jogged my memory on what I was going to say. So I'm going to finish that too, because it kind of applies here. The problem of dogmatism is so deep that people are looking for, what would Lenin say, right? Please, Lenin, give us the religious doctrine that will guide us towards the Holy Land. But Lenin himself would be the first to criticize that. He would say, you guys can do it. Do it yourselves. And he tells us in his letter to the American worker that we have a long, rich revolutionary tradition of our own thinkers. And it's not just Du Bois, right? De Leon is a huge one. Wedemeyer is a huge one. Henry Winston has his own thoughts. I mean, MLK is, like I said at the very beginning of this, absolutely brilliant, even though they never give him credit for that, right? They look at him only as an organizer. He was far more, because without that most advanced revolutionary theory, he would not have led a revolutionary movement. Go ahead, Saul.
I wanted to give an example of like adapting to, like, say, the tech era by reading Lenin and so, what you would want to do is see, like, well, what's the new advantage of the tech revolution is, like, you have information, you can communicate better than you ever can before. And the way that the Bolsheviks did that was they had a they had a press, right? They had a central press, and even after the Soviet Revolution, Stalin is still saying we need to use our press as the central organizer of our party, right? Because from the beginning it was always that's kind of what politics is coming into contact and communicating with each other. So you could look at the different conditions of, like, you could study why they used the press as their central organizer and realize, well, that's what the internet could do. It could also provide a central organizer. You could, like, go into ways to see like what's similar with the press in those days and what's similar with the internet now. Like, back then there wasn't a lot of literate Russians. A lot of them were, like, 78% were illiterate, and but the only people who could read were all, like, a lot of them were intellectuals, and a lot of the communists were intellectuals, right? They were all, like, more literate. That's kind of what we have now. We can find people of the same struggle, the same, like, communist struggle on here, and center ourselves across the whole country very easily. It's kind of like, that's kind of what I would see as, like, taking a time like now that Marx couldn't, or Lenin couldn't have imagined, but understanding what along the same principles are, like, used, or, like, what things are used for, like, what things, I don't know if that makes sense. It's hard to explain, but finding the same things and applying them to now, and understanding why they worked,
The phrase you're looking for is universal and particular, right? What is universal about what they did, and how can we apply it to our particular situation the way they applied it to theirs? So their particular included the printing press, right? Their newspaper. Ours includes the internet and the Midwestern Marx Institute, etc., right? Very, very important to add, brother. And I think it's funny. I was actually on the phone with Carlos for a minute before I began class today, and I hung up almost immediately because something that we were talking about jogged my memory on something I was going to write. And this is part of the reproletarianization paper, right? And part of the theory of reproletarianization is the new relations of production that are being created right now by the advance in the forces of production. And this creates the relationship between the reproletariat and finance capital and Silicon Valley, et cetera, right? And it must, therefore, include new forms of organization that takes all that into account. But someone watching on the YouTube asked a really good question, so I want to answer that real quick. Sean Moon says, how can you have a serious conversation with someone about Marx who actually believes that they will one day be wealthy under capitalism, despite all the evidence to the contrary? That's a really good question, Sean. I've had this conversation a bunch of times. And it always comes down to, okay, prove it. Oh, wait. I'm pretty sure. And even if you don't, what we're talking about is a game of numbers, right? So what the libertarians will sometimes say is, oh, just start your own business, right? How do you extract profit from others by being a parasite on them the way the business starter does for everyone in society? That doesn't make sense. In order for it to continue on, you need more workers than owners. And I feel like they don't do this basic math. And so then I ask them, well, are you going to go spend all your money at a casino, right? Because right there, you're going against the odds and the numbers too. The numbers always add up in the side of the house. That's why there are casinos. They're not a risk for the casino. The math on it is solid. They win, period. Even when there is one or two jackpot winners or whatever, the house always wins, like they say. So that's not to say that capitalism is a night in Vegas. It is not. But that's a good way to get them thinking about the mathematical impossibility of that happening for everyone. And therefore, the unlikelihood it happens for them, right? Show them the statistics that our generation, or not mine, mine, is the first in American history to be significantly worse off than the one before. And this is what reproletarianization is all about, right? That there were levers in place that sort of papered over the contradictions of capitalism, created the middle classes, right? And allowed the working people to build a better life, a bit of stability, etc., in the past. And this comes about through class struggle, through the existence of the Soviet Union, etc. But that's what happened, right? In our era, that's gone. That's over. The middle classes are dead, or dying, really is more appropriate. But if you look at now, like, what is it, 70%, I believe? Don't quote me. It's between 60 and 80. It depends on which study you're talking about. But struggle paycheck to paycheck, right? A fifth of American children go hungry every day. There's a 7-Eleven a block from my house. Every morning as I go to work, I watch a family eat out of the dumpster, right? This is the actual reality. And if, he wants to dream, that's okay. But the only way to actually believe we can get wealthy is to fight for it. Because the bosses, the establishment, whatever you want to call them, will fight us tooth and nail, and they do. We have a long history of that. But thank you so much for that question, Sean. That was a really good one. Do I see you having a question, Cheryl?
Yeah. Well, first, just to add to what you were just saying, that would mean that capitalism is a pyramid scheme.
Yeah. It's funny. In this paper, I describe modern finance capitalism as a Ponzi scheme, because it kind of is, right? And what happens when people start pulling their money out of the Ponzi scheme? It all comes crashing down, right? Like it did at SVB Bank or Silicon Valley Bank, right? The problem is the pyramid here is built with the lives of the working class people of this country. And when it crashes down on top of us. And I don't know about y'all, but I ain't about to let that happen. I'm going to fight until I die to make sure that doesn't happen. And I know all the guys and girls in this class are going to do that too. But everybody out there watching, we want you to fight with us, because together is the only way we can win this fight.
Yes, but the point that I originally was going to make is that one of the reasons why all of this stuff is so hard to read is also one of the reasons why it's so universal and it's still timely in our time, because he was writing in the general without any real specifics, but trying to use language that would describe the qualities of things as opposed to the examples.
Yeah, he's being very universal here, right? He's describing the laws of development, what things are in a general sense. That's why we often fill in our own particular examples to help with that. It's one of the reasons.
Well, like software has to do quite often. They have to think of all of the possibles, or how to categorize things in order to define a rule to apply for.
Yeah, and thought has categories the same as anything else. In fact, if you listen to when Carlos and I talk, we'll often talk about categories of knowledge, or that was a Hegelian category. That was, one of Lukács's categories. That was an Ilyenkov things like that. They're sort of collections of notions that the word category just fits with, And someone else actually, Ryan Wagner, points out something interesting in our YouTube, saying, my generation is the first that will have a shorter lifespan than their parents based on our current path, of course. That's true. And it's messed up. And it shows you what the lack of working class militancy and the retreats we had to engage in, etc., result in. If we do not fight, our conditions get worse, because the bourgeoisie is not our friend. They are not buying us off, right? They're not in league with us because we're all, evil settlers or whatever. No. They are our enemy. They only improve their conditions and fulfill their material interests at the expense of ours. And we only improve our material conditions, fulfill our class interests at the expense of them. Did you have another thing to add, Cheryl, or is your hand just still up?
Well, it's just still up. Other than I would say that my generation is the immediately after the boomers. It's often combined with the boomers, but it's actually the Jones generation. We grew up with Watergate, and we're the generation that saw the peak and saw the drop. The college tuitions were affordable when I started, and they doubled by the time I finished.
Wow.
And, just everything was just, you could see it all coming.
Yeah, and that was the turning point. Think about it. When did the tech revolution really begin? That was it.
Oh, yeah.
That was the turn towards the first consolidation of finance capital, right? That was the beginning of that second Red Scare. Thank you, Cheryl, for adding that. We'll get to you in one sec. We got a super chat though from Lemonhead saying natalism is the ultimate Ponzi scheme. Good job. Lemonheads always has funny stuff to add. True. Anyway, go ahead, Saw.
I was gonna say you're talking about militancy for the working class movement. And I thought it would be a good time to mention that there's a historically unprecedented thing coming up it's actually, speaking of militancy, it's like scheduled to be like a month from now, August 1st. But the largest largest strike for one private sector entity is probably going to happen, with 300,000 UPS drivers and warehouse workers going on strike. That's about the size as the strike that happened around 1917, the steel strike, or 1918, except that one was across a whole bunch of different companies. It was just an all steel strike. This one's going to be UPS workers specifically. So there's still going to be other people striking and having their strikes going on. But I think it's something I wanted to tell people about so they could be prepared for it, ready to be militant. And I really hope that we can see the socialists and the people who call themselves communists and socialists come out and stand with them, not be like the Democrats did with the rail workers, where they dropped their own demands for them when they were demanding get your hands off the contracts, right? A lot of socialists and communists fell for that, but now we can prepare a month ahead of time to make this, this is going to be a blow at
Let me interrupt you real quick, so no communists fell for that. Some people that call themselves communists fell for that.
Correct. Right. Yeah. Yeah, that's all I was going to say. But yeah, that's 100% correct. People who weren't, the Mensheviks fell for that. The Bolsheviks didn't,
Damn straight, brother. Yeah. Keep your eye on this UPS strike. It's going to be huge if it happens. And we all hope that, they cave to the Teamsters, obviously. But if it happens, get out there. You will not find more appreciative people than striking workers when you go to help with them on the picket line, right? Bring stuff with you. Bring coffee. Bring a bunch of Gatorades if it's hot out. Bring food, anything. Go there and just talk and say, hey, what can I do to help? It is amazing the kind of solidarity you will find with people that the left, the right opportunists who pretend they are communists, they know who they are, tell you are horrible, right? You will not, trust me, it is a wonderful thing to do. And this is how we can help them, right? If our goal is to overthrow capitalism and we don't want to talk to people biting the boss because we're afraid they might think something we don't like, we are no communists and have no right to call ourselves communists. So get out there. And if, it feels a little socially awkward, just go up there and be real with them. Be like, yo, I feel weird saying this, but, these weird Midwestern Marx Institute guys said you would appreciate if we came and asked how we can help. So how can we help? That's all. Just be honest, right? You'll get put to work doing something. Believe me. All right.
I was going to say, when the spontaneous, this is the dictatorship of the proletariat happening spontaneously. The spontaneous, the people, the productive forces behind it have to be able to realize what's going on, and it's on the communists, the conscious movement, to merge with that spontaneous action, making it conscious of itself. That's what builds the conditions. Or I guess when the dictatorship of the proletariat realizes itself, it's just, practice more. It's always there,
Right. Oh, absolutely. And here's the thing. This is one of the reasons party building is so important, and education and making sure we all know what we're doing and we're joining the Communist Party, etc. Right? Because what is tailism, right? Tailism is going to where the workers are and following along, right? And that's, what it is. But bringing the social consciousness of working class people forward to the necessity of revolution means you must be respected in your own right as an organization that is able to actually provide something, right? You're not just there to help out. You are there to meet them, make contacts, etc. Let them know that no matter what, the communists always have their back, right? That's one thing. At the same time, you are there to make sure that we're building connections. Everybody's growing this community and creating the force that will be able to overthrow capitalism itself, right? The job of a communist party in 2023 is to act as an umbrella, right? That can make sure this union, this community organization, that advocacy group, etc., are all within one united force, right? This is the strategy that PSUV in Venezuela used, right? They connected everyone. Everyone had a seat at the PSUV table, right? And this is the shape that we could bring things in here. This is a job our Communist Party could fulfill. But first, we need to come back from the darkest period in this party's history, right? We need to overcome right opportunism, liberalism, all the problems of the middle class that stem from the last period of our history. And how do we do that, right? What was Stalin just saying in the last pamphlet or the last section of the pamphlet? He was saying that we do that with the most revolutionary theory. And then as we progress it, as we do what we were just talking about with the striking workers, et cetera, it can grip the masses, and we can push forward and disclose those contradictions of our society and move forward the material life of society, to use Stalin's words, right? That, brothers and sisters, is how we get to socialism in our particular situation. That is what American Marxism in practice looks like. It looks like all of us, right, being equal, having equal seats at the table, an overarching group of us. It is out of many creating one, right? That's written right on our money. The bourgeoisie do not know what that means. We do, right? We can make that a reality. And that's what I want to get through, because so what you said just kind of inspired me. It is up to us. Nobody else. Ain't nobody coming to help us, right? Who's going to help us? The middle classes who are busy looking down on us, thinking we're stupid. You know, they're not going to help us. We have to help ourselves and each other. And when we do, I mean, the sky is the limit. Revolution is on the horizon, right? Revolution isn't just a direct action. It builds, right? It is constructed. And that's it, really. That's everything. We understand that, and we know how to fight. And knowing how to fight is half the fight. All right. Enough of me ranting and raving. I hope everybody learned a lot tonight. I say this all the time, but you guys are doing awesome at this. I am so impressed by all of you. All of you. You're much smarter people than I am. Thank you very much, class. Stick around for a minute after we go off air on the broadcast. We'll hang out. And for everybody else out there, Carlos Garrido's class is starting pretty soon here, I think in an hour. So stick around or, watch that one as it happens. And we will see you next time.